All right, so welcome to another little episode filming of people from my life who I think have something really interesting to share in the Life with Neil series. And today I have Tony Lacertosa, who I met quite a while ago, and we haven't talked for some time. But the at the time, Tony's work on the issue of civility always impressed me. And because of my, kind of propensity for work on inclusion, this aspect of civility was really interesting to me. So I asked Tony to kind of share some time with me because here in June of 2020, um, the issue of civility seems quite prominent in need. So, Tony, if you would, um, please, come along and just give us a little bit of a background about you and how it led to, the work in civility, and get a little bit of a story there, and then we'll sort of get going on the discussion.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, Neil. I'm very happy to participate in this series of yours. I came to this work in civility basically a three-step process, and I'll summarize it so it doesn't take the entire time of our framework here. I started out professionally as a high school science teacher down in New York, and I spent a lot of time working with students who were kicked out of a regular high school for behavior problems and discipline problems. I was in a special program where these students were grouped 10 to 15 in the class, and I was tasked with teaching them science. The first thing I needed to figure out for myself was, okay, how do I get these kids to use scalpels to dissect a frog, hydrochloric acid to see if there's limestone in a rock, and not use those as weapons against each other or against me? And I realized, okay, I've got to figure out some way to keep things in this classroom civil, for lack of a better word. When I left that job, retired and moved to Maine, and now have a position as an instructor of science at Southern Maine Community College, I realized that a lot of my students were going to go on to professional careers in science. And knowing that working in science labs and science teams can sometimes be a rather difficult situation, I thought it would be a good idea to teach them some of the lessons that I've learned myself about how to work cooperatively in a group. And so in my classes, I'm actually doing a lot of that work, or some of that work, at least in the labs, teaching them how to work together on projects and research projects and labs together as a cooperative team, and not get down each other's throats. And how do you do this civilly? And how do you talk to each other in a way that will keep things respectful? The third part of this process was a friend of mine who's made an entire career out of training business people in teamwork, got wind of what I was doing and asked me if I wouldn't mind working with her to use some of the lessons that I'd learned to help her with her corporate clients. And said you'd be surprised at how much of that the corporate world needs in a civility training. So I've been doing some work with her in that respect too. So right now I'm doing two things. I'm still teaching science at the college and doing civility work there to train them, and helping her in her use of civility as part of team building and team cooperative work.
So, you shared a document with me, and I'm, just while I'm, kind of here, I highlight some things on, this civility chapter for a book. Mm-hmm. And while these are sort of about 10 years old, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the data is still, quite true. Was that 96% of the people in the US have experienced incivility at work, and more than half of them experience stress as a result of it, and 3/4 of them are dissatisfied by the way their company dealt with incivility. And this also mentioned that the cost to US company was somewhere around $300 billion a year. And that's sort of related, because I saw somewhere between 6.5 to 7.5 weeks was spent by leaders 6.5 to 7.5 weeks in each year, dealing with employee issues related to, and kind of a different word, incivility matters.
Mm-hmm.
And what was kind of interesting too in there was that of those who had been on the receiving end of civility, I think it was something like 90% had resorted to retribution type of tactics
Mm-hmm.
in either subtle or not so subtle ways. So maybe just a little bit on, once you were asked to kind of get into this work, did you sort of spend any more time on that research, and kind of, what were the things that you were, you kind of took your classroom experience, and then did you do any more work to sort of really understand the kind of more formality around that issue? And what was some of the work that you found, and what did you find?
Yes, Neil, I had to. When I was asked to transfer this from school to the corporate world, I needed to find out just how this was impacting them. I knew how it was impacting teachers, but what's actually going on in teams. So I did do a lot of research, which showed up in that chapter for the book that I wrote. As you said, that the research goes back almost 10 years, but from what I've been reading, that's still pretty accurate statistics. I had to do research into corporate America, what's going on with them, and I counted a lot on my friend whose life was working there, and had her share stories with me, and had to put me in contact with people in teams that were not functioning well, and talking to them, what was going on, what was happening. And I realized that there really was a lot of similarity between incivility in the classroom and incivility on a science research team and incivility on a corporate team. What I found was that a lot of the things going on in corporate world was basically a matter of people on the teams not feeling respected, not feeling valued. And when that happens, that's what leads to incivility. Um, People need to understand that they are valued, that what they have to say is important, and that no one is doing anything to make them not feel like they belong to the team. And so I was able to find out a whole bunch of things that really were considered to be incivility, that people in the workplace thought incivility, that I hadn't thought of in the first place. We think of incivility as someone yelling at someone or cursing at them, but little things that we were all guilty of doing are interpreted by people in the workplace as incivility. For instance, not giving your speaker your full attention, not answering an email or responding to a phone call, making some kind of a rude gesture, like with your face, like that, when someone says something. Those kinds of things. People who just turn away, or not paying attention, not actively listening, as I said. These kinds of things are interpreted by workers as lack of respect. They deteriorate trust in the team. They're not free to offer opinions. They feel that to become part of a team member, they have to be all yes men. That if you don't agree with the boss, yes, 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 fine, whatever, that they're going to have repercussions. And I think we all know that leaders can't be surrounded by yes men or yes people. They need to be surrounded with people who will challenge them and say, no, that's not right. And when people feel that they can't speak up, and try to give some positive or some kind of information to the leader that will be beneficial, even if it's not what the leader wants, they feel it's incivility or some form of uncivilized behavior, and they'll do something to react, for sure.
You use a key word in there, words, which are a technique, active listening. And could you, in your own, define that for us? It's sort of an expressive term, but really, what is active listening?
When you do active listening, when you're engaged in it, you're concentrating on what the person with whom you're speaking has to say, and not thinking in terms of what you're going to answer or give back. so many times we hear people, so many times all of us will hear someone speaking, and as a person speaking, I'm already formulating my response, and I don't really get to hear what the person's saying. When I'm actively listening to that person, I'm concentrating on the words. I'm trying to internalize them and realize the person's perspective, where it's coming from. And then I will sometimes go back and just want to make sure I get this clear. Is what you're saying this or that? Just making sure that the person knows that, yeah, I heard you. I heard what you have to say. I might not agree with you, but I heard what you have to say, and I value your opinion, and I'm respecting you by hearing what you have to say. Rather than just having a canned response ready, as if I didn't care what you said or not. I've got my answer ready already.
Right. And another term or another technique that I became familiar with, I don't know if you remember, was appreciative inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Maybe you can sort of share your thoughts on that, because I think they tie together, but they're not the same thing, are they?
Yeah, the way I interpret that is just probing further into someone's conversation, what someone has to say, asking questions, just probing deeper about where the information is coming from, what you have to say. That's my interpretation of it. You may have a different one, but in active listening, I think it's really important to drill down and say, I think I heard this, but can you tell me more about this? Or I'm real curious about that, and get the other person to speak more.
Right.
Probing.
Right.
That's I think a very important part of active listening.
Kind of the reason why I'm sort of drilling down on both those things, I think they're over this church, the saying, same church, different pew.
Mm-hmm.
Is that if we raise ourselves, if we put ourselves out into the outer world right now, as in national, regional, community, with everything that's going on between the pandemic and between the racism issues and the dialogue that's going on. From my perspective, and I'd love you to share from your perspective, that dialogue is so lacking, from my perspective, and full of such judgment and blame. I'm not judging the intent or the grief, but it just seems the conversation we're having is not very civil.
Mm-hmm. I
So,
agree.
I mean, if that piece, yeah, the model I think of, is always, that Channel 9 on the aircraft and listening to the air traffic controllers talking to pilots, because the need for calm and the need for precision in understanding is that it's paramount, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you right, and got a few pilot friends, and that conversation is very purposeful. It's probably, in some ways, not, it's very dogmatic in some ways, but it has a very purposeful intent of keeping things in a way that prevents tragedy, right? So if you were to, I mean, just kind of bringing that into the conversation, the whether it's in your research or experience, etc., this issue of civility, have you seen any good examples of it, that you'd like to share? What would your comment be on the world around us right now and the issue of civility, from the time that you first got into it to the time now? Has it got better, worse? What's your perspective?
Well, first, I'd like to just add something to your airplane pilot thing. A friend of mine is a private pilot, and during his training, he taxied his plane onto an active runway. And I was with him, and the air traffic controller said, "Sir, you've taxied onto an active runway. Please, please move your plane." But So when it was all over, and went back. It was a small airport. I went back to the control tower. I said, "You're awfully calm about that." With an incoming plane, I was sitting there. I was amazed how calm you were. The controller said, "Well, would you have listened to me if I screamed, 'Get your plane off!' I screamed at you. You didn't remember what I had to say. I had to be calm so you would be able to respond." And I think that goes to just what you were saying. There's a lot of conversation that's not calm. You see in the protests, and again, both sides yelling at each other. But how many of those are really sitting down and listening to each other's sides? I'm getting a sense the past week or so that there are sides trying to sit down and get together, trying to hear what the other one said. Right here in my hometown, the police have opened up times when open to the general public to come on in and sit down. Let's have a civil conversation, have a cup of coffee with us. Let's talk about what you see is going on in the community, what you think we should do. It's a very calming way of seeing that the police are willing to listen to what we have to say. That's just one example. I think from when I first got into this work, the civility issue has changed. It started out when I did this a number of years ago as not so much as a racial thing as was just people just not listening to anybody else and trying to get their side politically, pushing this or pushing that. What I'm seeing now is that it's spilled over into politics, spilled over into racism, it's spilled over into even religion. And because of social media, it's even harder to listen to the other side because people are listening to and tuning into the social media channels and conversations that validate their beliefs. If you're going to listen to Fox News all the time, you're not going to listen to MSNBC. If you listen to MSNBC or CNN, you're not going to listen to Fox News. You're not going to believe the other side. And the same thing with Facebook pages and Twitter accounts and all those. And so I think what's happening is that's making it even harder to have civil conversations. We're just inundated with news that validates our belief system.
Right.
And once you do that, it's really hard to listen to the other side.
But in how do you deal in this sort of bubble of civility? How do you see, or how would you deal with a genuine emotion of feeling wronged? Okay, and I'm not sure. This can go in a lot of different ways in terms of perspectives. A lot of people feel wronged for different reasons. How do you deal with that valid emotion that comes into play about feeling wronged and not listened to, and where something's gone beyond a typical kind of work experience and moves more into identity and who I am and what I represent and how I'm perceived? How does one deal with that and be respectful and honorable of that, yet find that place towards appreciative inquiry and active listening and somehow get towards a civil dialogue? If we assume that civility, like the air, if we're going to land the plane safely, right? How do we deal with that?
I think the first thing you have to do is make sure that you tone down the conversation. You can't, if you're having a conversation with an individual, I'll just take it from a one-on-one conversation perspective, if that's okay with you. You can't let inflammatory language or a tone take over the conversation. First thing you need to do is have a calm situation down, have it quiet, and now get into, let me know something about what's happened to you personally, what's happened to people you know. Again, this gets into the probing deeper. Let the person know that you are really listening to what's going on. And once the person, earn the person's trust, let them know that you really care. And that's done through a calm conversation, again, with really listening to what the person's experience.
Mm.
Then I think you need to ask the person, what would make things better? How do you see a positive change occurring? And again, listen to that. I think you can do that as an individual. I think you can do that from a group perspective. Let me know what I hear you. I understand what you're saying. I don't feel it because it's not my culture, not my history. But I understand where you're saying, and I understand where you're coming from. What can we do to make things better from your perspective? What do you think needs to be done? And again, have that as a civil, quiet conversation. I think a lot has to do with the person feeling that the person feeling wrong feels okay. I have a say now in what and how I think things should be better, and that's how I see it, Neil.
I, how do you, in my sort of experience with facilitation over the years, that there are certain moments. In my case, I was always dealing with inclusion and alignment, and there are certain moments when that cannot be achieved in 100% way,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So how do we deal with when whatever the pain and the harm is, because it's a there's a hurt, there's a pain, and we're sort of dealing with, kind of, we deal with a pain that is in a workplace form or in a school setting form. It's still pain, but there are varying degrees of that. How do we deal with a situation where somebody just refuses to come to that center? Do we break away? What do we do? How do we deal with that?
If it's gotten to the point where there's just no way to communicate on a civil level with this person, um, they're really not going to. I think things will just get even more inflamed if you try to push the issue. And so at that point, you need to back away. That's how I handle it. Just back away momentarily. If there's some way, if you know the person's network of people, people around him who he does trust, some way that you can maybe get those people engaged in conversation, then this other person might come around. If his friend or colleague, somebody he respects, is in conversation, that may have an influence to help this person. But if it's just one person and you don't know anyone else with whom he or she is associated, it's going to be hard to do if that person just won't come. And I think it's sometimes you just have to realize that this person's going to need more time. You'll
Yeah.
need more time for this person. And depending upon the situation, if it's a business situation where this person is being toxic to your company, you're going to have to deal with it somehow. I don't know if terminating the employee would help. It might just make things worse. But you're going to have to somehow separate this person somehow until he or she does get a little calmer. I like the idea of working with people whom you trust, so that you can get to them if you know that network, and having them hold a conversation with you. Then this other person might buy into it.
Yeah, I'm sort of guessing. Well, just again, my own experiences. We cut off that path to understanding and civil conversations, etc., way too quickly, right? So the situation that we just kind of went through there is really ends up being, I think, in the most extreme,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is it in the end that should be the exception in our lives, not the rule,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I just kind of realized that, while we're talking about a national, kind of conversation, that, that, it's hard. It's sort of, seems like, how can you extrapolate that up to that level? But it seems to me that that maybe if it was if we kind of think of it in lots of little cells connecting together, right? That it bubbles up into something different, and that if we all begin to adopt, right, um, an appreciative, inquisitive nature to those that we have the most differences with, and do that in a bi-directional way, that in itself would be an innovation right now.
Yeah, it's sort of a variation of the grassroots effort. It's kind of hard to change things on a national level, but if we can each do something on a small scale, it will grow exponentially. If we can just change one or two people, get a little more civilized, over time, hopefully it will spread. And I'm a firm believer in that small changes over time will make things better in the long run.
Well, I'm kind of hopeful that this conversation maybe plants a few little seeds out there, right? And so, Tony, maybe you're just sort of bringing this to a close. Anything from what you've learned, or whether it's a quote, or whether it's a piece, or whether it's a resource that you'd love to share? We talked about this could be a very long conversation. We talked about how we might come back and do a part two. But how would you like to close this? In any which way you want.
I still love the image of the ripple effect of pebble in the water. If you think yourself as a pebble going to the water, and the circle around you is a couple of people, one or two people, with whom you have a difference of opinion. If you could just have a civil conversation with those people and understand each other's positions, that maybe that circle will now get a wider circle and spread further. So I like to think of civility expanding in that way. And if we can all just reach out to someone who's not in our normal network, and now someone thinks differently, hold a conversation, hopefully enough of those will have a major effect in the world.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Well, I appreciate how you have tried to bring this subject, into a greater part of the world, and appreciate you sort of spending time with me and doing this. I once heard a statistic, I can't remember from its exact source, is that 5% of a culture can change a culture. Mm-hmm. And so I think I always like to think that we're 5% of something, right? So,
beautiful thought.
All right, Tony, Lacertosa, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And I'll at the end of this, I'll kind of leave some contact info, and if you'd like to share that, and also some links to whatever resources you'd like to share on it. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you. Bye.